one of the hardest names to pronounce in Finnish. Just kidding. Yeah, I come from Finland, Helsinki. I'm officially at school dropout, so don't give any professional labels on me. I know nothing about nothing. And yeah, so in this talk, I'm going to do a case study. I'll probably played a bit too much bullshit bingo when designing the title for this talk, but it's really more like a what-if kind of thinking that I'm going to pose here. And yeah, the point is getting rid of everything that you learned about object orientation, or at least the inheritance part. So yeah, the talk, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been in Aspen last spring, and I think it might be several of you wouldn't be here unless Jens was in Aspen. And yeah, thanks Jens for organizing this event. It's been very good. Now I must give some credit for this talk to Sean Parent. I'm referring to him many times during this talk. The topic originally is his, and he's probably the one who knows most about this. But I happen to invent one more thing to his presentation that I'm trying to hurry up so I can actually describe what I figured out myself. So first of all, there's one more thing I need to mention. It's my employer, Futurize. We are a rapidly, slowly growing company. Pretty nice place to work. It turns out we attended this kind of competition of whether it's a good place to be employed in, and on the second time we won the series in the whole Europe. So we're officially a pretty nice place to work. And yeah, they paid my flights and hotel here, so I must mention this. But no more stuff about Futurize. Well, one thing is one of the niceties, and this is really to you guys who are actually bosses and no longer developers. It's very nice when you build your company so that you let the programmers and the actual people who do the billable work do the decisions. So we have a very open atmosphere, and we try to keep everything transparent that can be within the law, and people make decisions themselves. I don't need to ask permission. I actually never asked permission to come here. Only I checked that somebody didn't say no. Okay. So the talk is in three parts: values, concepts, and then there's a slight bit of magic, and it might be characterized by these attributes. Suspicious, a bit clever. There's some Koenig lookup used, and yeah, definitely I'm not using boost program. Yeah, I'm an undergrad. Okay. Yeah, Sean Parent told about the love between shared state and all this in BoostCon or C++ Now last spring, and basically he told how they implemented Adobe Photoshop's infinite undo feature, which originally was pretty complicated, and they found out ways to make it really simple. And the whole idea was based on the fact that they redid their object structures so that they pretend to be values, and so they can be easily copied around. And there are a couple of tricks that I'm going to cover here that they use there. I don't know much about Photoshop myself, so I don't have so cool demos that it is. So just this sort. Okay. Yeah. First of all, dealing with values, it's not perfect yet in C++ 11, but it's really nice to work with functions that are preferentially transparent, so that they only take inputs as the arguments and return the output as a result. If this was C++ 03, you would mention that it does an extra copy there, but this one actually does no copy at all. So the R in this end like you might know, is an OR value when it's returned, being a local value. So it turns into a temporary, and it might be moved. It might even need no move construction to the left-hand side where this IO is called, and then we might write functions that reuse OR values. So in this case, doubles is taking the vector by value. There is a slight but here, which is that if the argument to double is an L value, then we actually iterate over the range one extra time. But this makes a copy or move into the function and then finally returns the double vector, which is, it keeps the arguments untouched unless they are OR values. So it's pretty nice looking code when you write like this. And in fact, in C++, even in C, everything is by default a value. A value is something that's defined or identified by its value, but by its shape in the memory or by its bits. You may freely copy values. That's one inherent things on those. And you see those many of the standard, all the containers basically in the standard are values or made to be values. And even pointers are values if you don't regard the pointed to object as being part of this identity. So yeah, these things compose well, and in the parallel world they are very nice to have. When you start to do resource acquisition, initialization, or things like this, and wrap things into classes, it's you who make things non-values. So this class would be not copyable, so it's no longer a value. It cannot be passed around like that. It could be movable. It's not by the standard unless you define the OR value construction. So yeah, and if you want to deal with values, you need to do something more to keep things as values. So Rich Hickey is the inventor of the Clojure programming language, and I think he's made these things really simple sounding. He's talking about values versus places, and this was on a talk about databases, but the whole Clojure language, like many of the functional languages, actually try to deal with data that is immutable. Or it might be mutable in the inside, but then we're dealing with a unique thing that isn't used anywhere else. So it's an optimization. And this is called value semantics. So when we're dealing with values, it's typically something else than thinking where something is. We're thinking what something is, and not where. So that's the value versus place. There are some nice ideas for dealing with values in C++, and this one is actually made by Adobe. It's in the ST-Lab, the Adobe library, ASL or something, anybody remembers. It's open source. Was it BSD Lite or something? And I think they left it behind. They don't have money to do it further at the moment. But one nice thing in there is this copy on write class that actually enables you to pretend as if things were values where actually they are sharing memory, and only when you need to make mutation there. Well, if you know Qt, you know how copy on write works. The nice thing in copy on write is that it's explicit, which means that you don't get to, whenever you access for reading certain element there, you don't get to check whether this one is unique or not. It's only when you want to make changes there. So if you see here, I have A and B being the same object, and they actually are the same object. Not only do they compare equal, but still vectors can be compared like this nowadays. Nice thing in C++. Their addresses are equal as well for the data. And when we're dealing with copy and write, we need to explicitly tell when we want to modify something, so we get a non-const reference. And at that point, if the internal counter, similar to what is inside Boost shell pointer or Stip's shell pointer, when it's smaller than one, then it creates a clone of the original object, and then you start using that unique thing there. So that's very practical to use. And even more interesting is, of course, now I'm dealing with ints, and it makes no sense. Well, a vector of ints, it would make some sense, but I could have a vector of copy and write hard items. So wrap this OR thing into another copy and write thing. I mean vector of those. Yeah, that's what I had to say about values. It's really nice. Then polymorphism. One thing Sean mentioned in his talk is that it's not types that are polymorphic, which is a common misconception. There might be polymorphic containers that can contain many kinds of types, but the type itself is not polymorphic. It's an algorithm. It's a function that's polymorphic. Say template. It's compound time polymorphic. And when we're dealing with polymorphism, we actually mean dealing with code that does the similar thing for different kinds of types. Yeah, what can I say then? A bit of disclaimer. I had a bit of laughter when I invented this next slide yesterday. We do like Qt, and I do like it. I've used it for Virtue quite a bit. But it's one good example of how object-oriented designs and inheritance can go pretty tough. So here we go. It might make sense if we had a graphics item to create some kind of taxonomy on the items. We do have an abstract graphic shape then Liskov is mentioning something. So, there's a graphics object, yeah, multiple inheritance. And then of course the abstract shape item, and there are many kinds of shapes and all this. And I've dealt with this hierarchy in a couple times, and when I'm dealing with, it's not, the problem is not the code how it's implemented. The problem is when I'm dealing with code that is actually using this hierarchy, and my colleagues have created code. Not everybody of them are the best programmers, even if some are better than myself. Yeah, it's the time when I have a little clean up the desk and sharpening my pencil, and when the pencil is half shorter, then I probably know where to go, and it's especially when it's dealing with shape that is shared between things. This was what Sean Parent was referring to as scoop the pumpkin problem. I've never scooped a pumpkin, but his point was that if you take a ball out of a pumpkin, it's full of those threads that just like come behind, and you thought you just get this little bit of classes that I can then reuse in my code, and actually you get like hundreds of different files that you need to install in your source code or code base, and it's just impossible. And that's one of the reasons why I hear Adobe has given a way of not only object-oriented programming per se. They don't even use a similar, one framework. Their idea is to make things as independent as possible, and everything should be in a library. I recommend doing that. So make things self-contained libraries with testers and all. So what I'm going to show in this talk is a way to prove that C++ might be a modern language still. Maybe some 10 years ago, 11 years if I remember correctly, Mr. Philip Wadler posed this idea of an expression problem. Well, to me it was a problem, which I think I solved. It really is a measure of how good a programming language is when it comes to restructuring code. And when we're dealing with pieces made by third parties, we might not be able to touch their source code anymore. So embedding those features that they implement into our code base might be next to impossible. So there are two kinds of polymorphisms, and the expression problem is really that in the traditional kind, it's very easy to add new types that implement those features. You might think that this would be, say, interfaces or pure abstract classes, and these would be concrete classes that implement those. So it's very easy to devise new classes, but it's hard to add new features or modify existing ones. Well, hard to add new features because you need to touch every one of those bits of source code that originally inherited these base classes. On the other hand, in a functional world, we then can easily add new functions over existing types.
So
we
if you
have
have hundreds of
algorithms
derived
use those
classes
functions,
or special
and we
classes,
want to add new types.
and you change in the top,
we compile those
you have a lot of work.
because they don't know anything about those existing, those new types. And yeah, here's a little example to point this out a bit more. Suppose we have a drawable class, and a point might be drawable. I'm omitting the actual implementation of how a point is drawn. We might have a vector of drawables, and you probably see the problem here. We have a vector of pointers. So who's dealing with those pointers? We need to somehow manage the memory, and that's one of the biggest drawbacks. Why this is any ideas? Why we need to have pointers with this kind of inheritance?
Because drawables are different sizes.
Yeah, they are different sizes. So we must allocate them on the heap. We don't. It's impossible to allocate those on stack, really, unless we know they are at most something, and you get the point. Yeah. And then there's the concepts based, or which is more common in the functional world, and the standard libraries. Well, the algorithms there are pretty much functional world in C++. So it's easy to have types. The types don't inherently have any functionalities. We just attach functionalities to those. And in this example, I'm using boost variant here, omitting boost here. But so it's a type that can contain several concrete types and only one at once. So it's kind of a safe union. And when we implement this draw function for variance, so that it actually calls the corresponding draw function that was implemented for the actual types, then we can have those drawables in one container. Like in here, a vector of variance of point or circle. Yeah, well, now if we consider maintaining source code in row polymorphism, we can pretty easily add new drawables, like I mentioned, say a circle. But if we need to add a new function, say measuring the size of the drawable, we need to touch each and every class that we originally had there. Whereas in this calling polymorphism or with concepts, we can add the size very easily. We just need to implement it for each of those types. Okay, it might be a bigger adjustment. It's certainly doable without touching the source code. And when we add a new type here, say a box, to add the box into the algorithm we originally had, we need to change, or if they were templated, at least recompile those, each one of them. It might be simpler, but it cannot be put into a library, for instance, a dynamic one. Yeah, all right. Should follow my thought more. Okay, so let's dive more into concepts-based polymorphism. So it was the latter of the two parts. So in this, we are trying to keep the functions and the data structures separately. And let's see what we do have here. Okay, yeah, we do have some existing classes. Struct point doesn't have to know anything about this concept itself. It's sufficient if we can implement the draw. So in this case, drawable is defined by just having a function in this case, an ADL function, so we need to use argument-dependent lookup there. But namespace in the same namespace with that guy. So this needs to be callable with those constraints, and there's some description of its behavior. So the not nice thing is that we need to document this, and there's no language support for documenting this the other way. There might be some more in Haskell. Yeah, but yeah. So in order to handle memory with this, we need a wrapper type, and yeah, I'm diving more into this in the following 2 slides. But the public interface for the wrapper is we generally use something like a unique pointer there, and then we do have different constructors, and it's assignable, and we define copy for it. So unique pointer wouldn't be copyable by itself, but we can implement a copy for the contained data. And then we have concept here, which is an interface that the model implements. So internally, we do use inheritance, but the nice thing is that we don't need to do the inheritance in the classes themselves. How to implement the concept? Well, being a virtual base, we do need to have a virtual destructor. We may use default keyword there, nicely with C++11. And then we need a copy feature, and then the drawing, I have highlighted how the drawing happens there. So when we call the draw of the virtual base that we have in the pointer, it actually calls the implementation, of course, which then uses the argument-dependent lookup version. And comments on this. No.
But are you actually saying that it's a good thing to use pimples because it, excuse me, what we've seen on the slide previously on this unique pointer, this is a form of pimple?
Yeah.
Okay. And but it's a problem with template code. It's a concept. I mean, it's hard to make a template code with pimples because pimples should be in implementation file.
Yeah. This must be in the header file, so it's not pimple.
Okay.
And by the way, this is a wrapper. So I'm not adding this drawable class. The only member data it has is this pointer here, and it isn't aware at all what the pimples thing behind there is. But yeah, I know there are some pimple libraries, and one of them, at least one of them, supports this kind of having different implementations in the private implementation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the whole picture of this simplified example would look like this. So this class only has the draw feature, and it can be copied. So copying is then forwarded. That's the whole source code for it. Now to use it, we can, well, if we had point there like previously, we can just assign the point to the drawable, and the drawable adopts the point by itself. I don't remember if I implemented it so that it actually moves it into the thing, or so that it gets a copy of the construction point. It's probably did a copy, but it can be done so that it moves it into the pointed model there. And then we can just call draw on the drawable, which completes the point there, and it returns whatever, or does whatever side effect the point was intended to do. And so we can as well implement drawing for vectors. By the way, this is, I think, a nice way of doing joins. I mean, string concatenation with some joining character sequence in between with C++11 is such a common pattern that I do have some helper code that does that even for me, and I think Boost string algorithms definitely has something like this. But this is as short as I could do it, so that it actually prints something like JSON. And here, this is really a bit more advanced than it might appear at first. I'm sorry if you can kind of see the upper code there. In the slides that I put in there, you can see them all at once. So I have a vector of one drawable on the first line here, then I push into this vector of drawables the vector itself. Any surprises there? Yeah. What happens is, like I mentioned, a drawable is anything. Any type can be converted to a drawable as soon as draw function is implemented for it with a given signature. And in here, I just implemented drawing for vectors of any types. So yeah. I know what you're thinking, but I let those jokes to Joe Park, who is more into exhibit. So yeah. So because a vector can be drawn, assuming that the containing type doesn't create any compiling errors here. So we can then actually put the vector itself and adopt it to a drawable. And what it does, it creates a copy of the vector. So the first element was here, and the second element is the whole vector of the one element. So it's a copy of it itself. And then we push one more element here, so we get the whole thing, and it's printed out. Oh, crap. Yeah, at least one semicolon is missing. Anything else?
Yes, pushback 0.42 should be 0.34.
Oh, that's right. I'll fix that. Okay. Nice. Yeah, there is a certain problem, which I think many of you can think about. This ADL is a mess. Yeah, draw is such a common name that it might as well be that some other implementation gets fixed and just draw. And to be honest, my little idea doesn't fully cover this problem. It only makes it smaller. And we only have this one draw function there. So can we do better? So turns out the whole technique that we use here demands the use of ADL in one way or another. And it's just where we move the ADL selection. Somebody who knows more about boost type erasure may correct me if it's not using ADL inside. I think it is in somewhere. Okay, so we can do one thing to move the ADL thing behind the covers and not have it so exposed. So this is I think the bigger idea that I got after the conference, callables. So the whole idea is to have, this is a purely recurring template pattern class callable that just implements one nice set of function call operators. There's a slight bit of perfect forwarding inside there, and that's not the whole implementation of it, but I'm going to show it on the next slide. It's not much more. So this thing, in here I'm actually using it. I define an add function, and the nice thing with this add function is that I define what an addition is, and then I have a unique type for this addition. And this addition is polymorphic anyway. So if I define addition for integers, it might look like this. I probably would use templates for this, but here's a concrete one implementation for integers. So it just sums up those. And what it does when I then use the call operator, oh, by the way, I did use some context from magic and created one global object here.
That would be added and call after call.
Yeah, it's of type added. Yeah, I could do it in 2 lines. This one can be turned into a macro if you like. If you don't, you can do it like this.
The next one, the int form, and then add and it must be the type.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. One mistake more. So this should be the type, and not, of course not the name of the object. So yeah, but internally it gets to call this kind of ADL expression, which then maps to this function call. And this thing is nice in the way that it actually delays the selection of the overloads up to that point where we actually do the call. So where we have defined the add fn here, we can define this different implementations for it, for the overloads, somewhere else afterwards, as soon as we include those things before we actually use them. We have templates, we can actually introduce those even later than the templates, as long as we only instantiate those templates somewhere further away. Actual implementation, I did a couple more things. I do have a nice little no except support here. So if we implemented the call thing without, doing no except things there, then this call to this callable actually is no except as well. And there's another nice thing I put concept for there. I shouldn't use the line there, it's extra. But I don't have an example in here, but you can look in GitHub. I can even use these callables in context for expressions, so I can create additions and subtractions of those as this kind of polymorphic function objects, and I can put those into template argument lists where, say, integers are demanded, which is pretty nice. So, one more thing. Callables, unlike ADL things, are namespaced. And that means that we can actually have a function name size in two different namespaces, and we can give different meanings for those sizes. So in the graphics namespace, the size might be the 2D size of the item we're looking at, or the bounds or something like this. And in containers, it might be the number of elements. And there's no mistake with this system. So when we are calling graphic size, it's calling graphic size, and when we're calling container size, it's picking this overload. And we can even implement both of those in the same class if it's both a container of some things and something that's having a graphical size. In addition, we can use those callables both in standard library algorithms and at compile time, like I said. So they are really the overloadable polymorphic function objects. Pretty much that's it. Here's an idea for moving from member functions. I'm not saying that this is a wise idea for making it. Oh, there's a bug again. I shouldn't have override before actually inheriting some class. But a way for making the calls access private members. Here's one way. So we can actually implement as frames to those. And the only difference is that instead of calling foo.f function call, we use this main function and pass the object as the first argument, or wherever we had the object instead. It's in here in the list. And we can deal with this. We can pack the calls into template, variable template argument x. And here's the way I'm using here. I specify the expected result type in here, and then parentheses. First, I have the name of the callable. It would be nicer to have it on the left-hand side, but that was impossible. So I couldn't reuse this function signature in the template argument list otherwise. So then I have what I call a self-expression, and then a list of arguments. And this actually, the self-expression can be anywhere in the list, but we're coming back to the thing a bit further that it might not make sense to have it somewhere else. I, however, do have some example where I do have self somewhere else. And self is just a simple dummy empty struct defined in a namespace, which then is converted to the original type that is held polymorphically. So what I did is implemented a little proof of concept library. Proof of concept. Does this, and my claim is that this solves the expression problem in C++, which is one of the things that the functional programmers always claim C++ and Java and those don't have. Cannot solve the expression problem, but I'd say C++ wins here. What it does inside, from the template argument list, it creates a long chain of inheritance inside for the model, so that each one of the inheriting classes is actually implementing one of the calls and forwarding it to the held type there. And depending on which compiler I'm using, I'm not sure if the compiler allows inheriting multiple types at once, and then having the same name from each. I mean, the same name, different overload function visible in all the different descendants of that class. So in Clang it works. In GCC, I needed to make a fully linear structure there inside. But the thing is that whatever function calls I define here, the held object then just pushes the arguments forward to the held object, and this is the whole definition for an adapter that can hold any type for which draw function is implemented. Context here is just an stdio stream in my following examples. So I can create a std vector of graphics drawables and put anything into it, as long as the point has this implemented like we did in the previous example. And we can have more. So I'm just using an argument back here. So I could have some mutating things. Did I do it correctly? Yeah. I have still non-const reference. So if I'd like to have some setters there, I could have some that sets the size of the objects. And then I need some bit of macro glue. This just gives implementation of some constructors that we need. I do have an example in the web page where I'm instead of having this CRTP clause, I'm just saying using object equals for interface list of signatures. It's actually slightly wrong because it's messing up with the ADL when I don't have a concrete when I don't have the type in the same namespace. So in this way, when I'm not having a using declaration here, I name a concrete type object. I get ADL to work with the object itself. I just realized this last night and had a short sleep because of this. So, but the talk was saved. So I claim this solves the expression problem. It's possible to add up new types without recompiling existing algorithms using this. So of course I need to compile the code that is implementing those, but that's enough. And then I can add new poly interfaces without touching existing code. So if I had drawable, I could have something like measurable or something, and that's a new type, and I wouldn't need to touch those. Yeah. We have 7 minutes, says my clock here. I'll tell the next steps first, and then let's watch a bit of code, because we do have some fun. So there are some cons in this thing. Of course, I cannot group different interfaces, which would be nice to have a like union of different concepts. So if one is saying, let's say the name and age of some person, I could have another record that's having the name and some year of the person or something like this. And I cannot combine those, but it probably is pretty trivial, even if it's not that compile time easy to make this kind of union of interfaces. But that doesn't exist yet. I really recommend you to look into Boost type erasure, which does more of this, and the only thing that it doesn't have it was the following thing. Otherwise, in my opinion, it's pretty far ahead from myself. Yeah, let's see a bit of demo here. Quickly mirror the display, so we do see the same thing on the screens here. And in here, I have a couple of classes of this. The very same drawable is defined here as it was in the previous example. Some of the examples were just copied and pasted from this compiling code, so those were correct. You spotted the errors in that. Yeah, that was the hand-rolled version. Now I have a different one where I have some files adopting those existing things. So let's first look at what the graphics defines. So in here, I did have two different. Just a second. Yeah, I defined the functions in here. So I have a size function. I have a center function that tells the midpoint of the object and then how to draw things. And then combining these differently, I can define different kinds of interfaces. For instance, let's see. Here I do have the definition of object and drawable. So the drawable was simply just one I only need to have the drawing implemented, and for objects I do need to have these sizes and centers and all. I don't know really what to do with this tool, but there's one example, and like I mentioned, this actually works only so far, so it's not really correct. But in this demo, it happens to work. Maybe the order of things declared. Yeah, so in there, I have the simplest case. I have a couple of different types, and I have adopted those all. So I do have a show function that actually further, it's a function object as well, callable. So it calls the draw function inside, and then adds a new line there, so it's a bit nicer to read. So let's see what this piece of code does. I have a trick that when I save it, it runs the code and compiles another way around. So we see the items there, and then we can have a group. The group type is just a vector of those graphics. I uncommented a couple of lines there, and then I really push the group itself there. I save it and run, and now we should still show those things. So probably should show the group before and after the addition there. So there we see that thing getting added into itself. And yeah, we can do further. We can just pushing back some more things there. Here's an example of an algorithm. You could think of this as a runtime template, basically. So main overlap is using graphics objects, and I might as well have just template type name A and type name B there, and have those replaced by A and B, and then it would be fully templated and used in the compile time. But I do have it implemented for this virtually used types, and so I can test whether things overlap, and some of those objects did overlap, or it's whether their bounding boxes overlap actually. And then here I had a couple more objects, A, B, and C. Yeah, I show those objects first, and then I center them all. So I'm just calling center for each one of those four. I put them basically in the origin, and after that they should all likely overlap. So we get, when we print those, we should get true, and that concludes my demo. Yeah, questions?
Sorry, making you go. One question, I've read about the expression problem before, but I never actually got it. So maybe you can just explain in very simple terms what the expression problem is and why it is good. So
it's worth solving on the programming language design level. It's not something that you should need to solve on the library level, and that's what I'm saying this because I'm saying C++ moving towards a more functional, more parallel, more value semantic language, and it probably might make sense to have some feature for this in the core language. It's by the way, this is related to the talk about introspection. So I actually did a sort of an introspection here. I may list all the features of the type by using this kind of graphic. And the one difference is that the member functions. Well, there's no way to list all the member functions and generate those directly. So the only way I could do it programmatically, meta programmatically, was to have this callables that I could generate.
But still, could you say in a few words what exactly the problem is? What the problem is?
Yeah. The problem is that typically languages are either extensible in the way that you can add new types, or in the way that you can add new functionalities to existing types. But typically, at some time, you will face the situation when you would like to have somebody else's type having these features that I'm using here as well, but they don't. You saw the class hierarchy. It had two different text elements. They didn't have a common base dealing with text. So there were completely different text items. The one could hold something like style text, and the other one was just for simple text. And they had completely different types.
Okay, I think about it.
Yeah. Who's next?
Yeah, maybe you have already talked about the mistakes. Describe everything in C++ 11. Is it also possible to have this in C++ 18? Or does it depend?
As far as I understood, some parts of Boost type erasure are working in C++ 03. So similar ideas might work there, but it would be a huge code base compared to this. So my implementation got very much help from the Verity templates in particular. And I haven't tried compiling this on Microsoft compiler. They probably don't just explode it nowadays. Yes.
Yeah, it is completely possible to do this. What you said, everything would just expand for about 10 times. The very action would have to be replaced with boilerplate macros preprocessing, and then you would end up having, and then you would have to continue to move ahead to use things from Boost or Lambda, Spirit Proto, in order to implement all of these things. So it is entirely possible. This is so much nice. This is actually one of the best demonstrations of. Well, I don't know if you have the rooms to do that, to demonstrate what it would have looked like between C++ 03 and C++ 11.
I would need to get paid for it.
I was going to ask about, are you aware of the Adobe Poly library, which is ratio on steroids? Which
I knew that they copied their name for the namespace name of my library.
All right.
I haven't really looked what it does, but I understood that they are using similar stuff inside there.
All right, thank you. Thanks for a very nice presentation. This is actually demonstrates my point very clearly as to why we should be moving towards functional programming, including from the previous talks, value semantics. And this is probably one of the most key points in terms of moving forward towards a massively parallel world. Thank you.
Ja, die Fragen habe ich ja gar nicht bekommen.
There's still some time for coffee.